I hadn't even changed my clothes. My suitcase was still in the car when the email came through. Please come to my office at your earliest convenience. No subject. No smiley face. No congratulations. I had just landed after a 38-hour whirlwind. Tokyo, Zurich, New York. With one mission: secure the $15 billion funding deal Venturon had been chasing for 6 years. And I did it. 10 years of guaranteed capital across 3 continents, signed, sealed, and ready to activate. But Graham Lockhart didn't ask how the meeting went. He didn't ask if I had slept. He gestured toward the chair across from him, eyes glued to the folder in front of him like it might bite. "Nicole," he began, voice flat. "Effective immediately. We're restructuring your role and compensation." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "We're moving you into a more streamlined support capacity, executive coordinator to strategic ops." Support. I built strategic ops. "And your salary will reflect the adjusted scope. A 60% reduction." It didn't feel real. My body registered the words before my brain could. My throat tightened, my skin burned. But I said nothing. On his desk, 2 papers were already printed, one labeled Revised Compensation Agreement, the other Role Reassignment Confirmation. No room for negotiation, no blank lines for feedback, just 2 places for my signature. He slid a pen across the desk without looking up. "Your new supervisor will be Aiden. I believe you met him last week. Aiden Lockhart, his nephew, 27, fresh MBA, 0 field experience, the one who asked me where the coffee filters were during orientation." I nodded once, stood up, collected the papers. I don't even remember walking out. But I do remember the silence in the hallway as I passed the boardroom. I remember the smell of stale coffee and success I could no longer claim. And I remember one thought, cold and clear, cutting through the sting. They didn't demote me because I failed. They demoted me because I succeeded without their permission. And that was the moment something broke. And something else began. They didn't give me time to adjust. The morning after I signed the papers, I arrived at the office at 7:30 a.m. sharp, like I always did. My old keycard still worked, but everything else had changed. My name was no longer on the 4th floor glass door. The desk I had occupied for 8 years was already cleared. A fresh nameplate installed. Aiden Lockhart, VP, Strategic Ops. I didn't ask questions. I didn't cause a scene. Instead, an intern silently led me to my new workspace, a cramped desk wedged between the break room fridge and the office photocopier. No windows, no privacy, just the mechanical hum of a printer that jammed every other hour. There was no announcement about my new role, no handoff email, no "thank you for your years of service," just silence and eyes that refused to meet mine. That afternoon, I received a calendar invite. Strategy Review Prep, internal, 2:00 p.m., Boardroom A. No agenda, no context. Still, I went. Old habits die hard when I walked in. The room hushed like someone had spilled something. Aiden stood at the front of the projector screen, fumbling with slides. The rest of the team, my team, sat in awkward silence, avoiding my gaze. "Nicole," Aiden said, flustered. "Could you, grab a fresh pot of coffee from the kitchen?" For a second, I thought he was joking. Then I looked around. No one laughed. No one defended me. No one even looked up. I nodded, walked out. My palms were shaking by the time I reached the coffee station. I gripped the pot like it might anchor me to the floor. I wasn't angry yet. Not exactly. It was something worse, something raw. Shame that prickled at the back of my throat. A quiet burn in the pit of my chest. Like I had been erased and left to serve the people who used to report to me. When I returned, Aiden was mid-presentation. "Our new strategic roadmap," he announced, "was built in close collaboration with our senior leadership. He clicked the next slide. I froze. It was my deck, my framework, my language, word for word, even the color coding. The only thing missing was my name. It wasn't plagiarism, not technically. I had written it on a company server, but it felt like watching someone steal your voice and play it back to a crowd who pretended they didn't recognize it. Nobody said a word. The room nodded along, like Aiden had birthed the idea himself. I placed the coffee pot on the table and sat in the back. No one made space. No one thanked me. In that moment, I realized something brutal. They hadn't just replaced me. They wanted me to serve the version of myself they found easier to control. The next week, I started eating lunch alone. No one said it. But it was understood. I was radioactive now. Colleagues who once came to me for guidance suddenly discovered they were too busy. Elevators became silent. Conversations stopped the second I walked by. In a building full of noise, my world had gone very, very quiet. So I took my lunch to the back staircase. It was quiet there. Stale air, humming pipes, and solitude. I climbed slowly, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup I hadn't thrown away just yet. That's when I noticed something odd. The elevator screen lit up to 10th floor. Then nothing. No ding, no movement. Just silence. I kept climbing. When I reached the landing between the 9th and 10th, I saw it. A dusty, for lease sign taped behind a smudged glass panel. The plaque beside the door simply read, Level 10. Available for immediate occupancy. The logo underneath had faded, likely some startup that hadn't survived the pandemic. I stared at it for a long time. And then, I smiled. Not a wide smile, just the kind that hides behind the lips, sharp, restrained, but very, very real. The next day, I returned to the same staircase, this time with a sandwich and a question. At exactly 12:15 p.m., I walked through the front lobby instead of using my employee badge and asked to speak to the building manager. I introduced myself as a representative helping a boutique firm scout quiet, private office space. The receptionist nodded. A few minutes later, Thomas, late 50s, worn blazer, clipboard in hand, greeted me. I'm Thomas Renner, facilities director for the property, he said. So you're looking on behalf of a client? Yes, I replied, casually. A small advisory firm looking for long-term stability, some privacy, and potential expansion flexibility. He raised an eyebrow. That's exactly what we need right now. Since COVID, we've had to shift how we lease. Actually, he leaned in slightly, voice lowered. There's been talk of the ownership group offloading part of the building. Quietly, nothing public yet. But they're feeling the pressure. Not enough long-term tenants. If your client's serious, they might be open to selling partial equity in exchange for guaranteed lease commitments. I kept my face neutral, but my heart kicked. Office space, control, leverage, all hiding one floor above the people who demoted me. I'll pass that along, I said with a slight nod. Thank you for your time. As I walked out of the lobby, I glanced back at the brass directory. Venturon Capital, floors 6 through 9. Available, floor 10. I didn't have a plan yet, but I had a direction. And for the first time in weeks, I had space. If humiliation had been my first lesson, then clarity was my second. I stopped reacting. I started writing. The day after my meeting with Thomas, I returned home and opened a blank legal pad. Not a Google Doc, not a spreadsheet, just ink on paper, quiet and deliberate. I listed every asset I had, every person I trusted, and every line of leverage I could possibly pull. At the top, I wrote, Ash and North Advisory, confidential formation. The name meant nothing to anyone. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't tied to my personal brand or professional history, but it carried weight in my mind. Ash, for what I had burned through. North, for where I was headed. I incorporated the company under a limited partnership using a legal shell I'd once set up for side consulting, the kind of structure no one ever thinks to trace unless they're looking closely. I used my middle name for the registration and listed the mailing address of my old college mentor's law firm as the contact point. He owed me a favor. I planned to collect within 72 hours. Ash and North Advisory had a tax ID, a bank account, and a generic logo that looked just professional enough to blend in. No fanfare, no public filings that linked back to me. Just a clean slate, surgically quiet. By the end of that week, I reached back out to Thomas. I asked to tour floor 10, not as Nicole Hayes, demoted executive assistant, as A. Norwood, managing partner of a new financial strategy group seeking discretion and flexibility. He didn't blink. The space was exactly what I remembered. Unfinished. Wide open, silent, perfect. We signed the lease that afternoon. I paid the first 6 months up front, quietly using the year-end bonus Venturon had delayed after my Tokyo trip. I was never going to see that money anyway. Might as well put it to use before they forgot about it entirely. The next morning, I emailed a simple letter of interest to the ownership group through a legal proxy. Ash and North expresses potential interest in acquiring partial ownership stake in the building, contingent upon discretion and long-term lease consideration. No external disclosures at this time, no signature, no urgency. Just a nudge, polite, formal, and easy to ignore until it's not. Back at Venturon, no one suspected a thing. I still showed up, still made the coffee, still sat beside the printer. But now, I had keys, I had documents, I had time, and for the first time in my career, I was building something that couldn't be reassigned or renamed. If I was going to build something real, I couldn't do it alone, but asking for help, especially from people still inside the company that gutted me, felt like trying to hug someone while your hands were still bleeding. I started with Michelle. She was one of the sharpest analysts I'd ever worked with. Quiet, methodical, brilliant with predictive models. We'd spent 5 years troubleshooting late-night simulations together. Back when our work still meant something. I messaged her on Signal, not email, not text. Just one line. If I said there's a different way, would you want to hear it? Off the record? She didn't reply right away. When she did, it was 3 words. Where and when. We met that Sunday in the back corner of a coffee shop 2 blocks from the office. She wore sunglasses and a hoodie. Her first words weren't friendly. They'll blacklist me if they find out. I know, I said quietly, but they already made it clear loyalty doesn't mean anything to them. She stirred her coffee. What do you have? A floor, a plan, and silence. Next came Lewis. He'd been managing projects for the ops team, the kind that Aiden now claimed to restructure, without knowing how they worked. Lewis had integrity, but also 2 kids in private school. I expected him to hesitate. He did. If I leave now, I might never get back in, he told me. They own the contracts, I said, but we own the relationships. He looked at me for a long time. Then he nodded. The hardest was Diana. She was still handling client liaison for the $15 billion account. Smart, composed, and always 2 steps ahead. The kind of person you never see panic, even under pressure. She listened to me in silence, arms folded, expression unreadable. Do you know what they asked me in our last meeting? She said finally. What? She leaned in slightly, voice low. Is Nicole still involved? That moment cracked something open. It wasn't about titles. It wasn't about desks or salaries. It was about who they trusted and who they didn't. I'm in, Diana said, on one condition. Name it. We never become what they are. I smiled. But it wasn't out of victory. It was out of something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Small, quiet, and dangerously alive. 3 people, 1 empty floor, and just enough belief to begin. Hope is fragile. It only matters if you act before it fades. We didn't wait. Within 48 hours, we turned the 10th floor into a war room. No branding, no fancy furniture, just a whiteboard, 4 laptops, and a silent agreement between us. We weren't here to rebuild resumes. We were here to counter-strike. There was no salary yet, no funding pipeline, just time, grit, and coffee that tasted like resolve. I broke the strategy into phases. First, we had to reverse engineer what Venturon was doing wrong, because they were absolutely doing something wrong. Michelle, I said, circling a section of the whiteboard, I need predictive modeling based on how they might restructure the capital flow. Assume they're overpromising short-term ROI to please the board. She nodded, already pulling up her tools. Diana, go over the original commitments in the funding framework. What language can be weaponized against them if they're off course? On it, she said, already flipping through files. Lewis, I asked, any internal clues about where their blind spots are? That's when he reached into his bag and pulled out a wrinkled stack of papers. I wasn't going to mention this, he said, but someone left this in the copier room last week. I think they assumed no one would notice. He laid them out. Projected resource allocations, misaligned rollout deadlines, and a bolded note. Expedite client engagement by trimming pilot oversight. I stared at it for a second, feeling my jaw tighten. They're cutting oversight to look faster on paper, I said, which means they're about to break 3 clauses in the agreement. That's leverage. We worked 12 hours a day for 10 straight days. Michelle rebuilt the model with our approach. Steady. Compliance-proof. Sustainable. Diana crafted the comm strategy and flagged specific metrics the client cared most about. Lewis handled the internal timeline, mapped deliverables, and set a structure that mirrored, but improved, Venturon's existing framework. Meanwhile, I prepared the story, not a pitch, not a presentation, a truth. We weren't offering something new. We were offering what they'd been promised, by people who still believed in delivering it. By the end of day 10, the boards were covered. The plan was locked. The deck was airtight. We had no official title, no public face, no big-name firm behind us. But we had a plan built not for appearances, but for impact. And in that stripped-down office, above the company that tried to erase me, we weren't afraid anymore. We were ready. I picked 11 o'clock a.m. on a Thursday. Same time, Venturon had scheduled their quarterly strategic review on the 8th floor. I didn't choose that hour by accident. I chose it because I knew the building's rhythms, the way elevators slowed between 10 and 11. The smell of catered lunch that crept up the stairwells. The hush that settled before big meetings. But our meeting wasn't big. It wasn't loud. It wasn't wrapped in branded folders or scripted talking points. It was just 4 chairs, 1 screen, and a plan that actually worked. When the elevator doors opened on the 10th floor, the delegation from our $15 billion client stepped into a space that looked nothing like a firm. No receptionist, no glass logos, just us, Michelle, Diana, Lewis, and me, standing in a room filled with dry erase boards, models, and quiet confidence. "Where's your team?" one of them asked, looking around. "You're looking at it," I said. They blinked, then smiled. We didn't waste time. Michelle walked them through the model. She spoke clearly, answering every question with data, not drama. Lewis followed with execution timelines, showing how our version reduced rollout risk by 30% without cutting oversight. Diana closed with communication strategy and impact metrics, tailored to each market. And I watched, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I didn't need to say everything anymore. I had built something that could speak for itself. When it was my turn, I stood, clicked to the final slide and said this: "This isn't about saving face. This is about saving what you started. The plan you approved deserves to be executed the way it was promised, by people who understood it from the beginning and still believe in it now." There were no fireworks, no applause, just a long pause, a few exchanged glances. Then, quiet nods. The meeting ended at 12:20 p.m. No one lingered. No one needed to. We thanked them, walked them to the elevator, and watched the doors close. When I turned back toward the conference room, Lewis let out a slow breath. I think that was the first time I've ever seen them listen without interruption. "They weren't listening to pitch decks," I said. "They were listening to logic. It's been missing downstairs." Michelle half smiled. Diana packed up the folders. And then, at 1:07 p.m., I got the message. Subject: Interim Review Adjustment. Effective immediately. Venturon's current engagement will be paused for strategic reevaluation. Further collaboration to be determined pending leadership reassessment. I didn't jump up. I didn't cheer. I just leaned back in the chair, eyes on the ceiling tiles. They hadn't chosen us, not yet, but they'd chosen to stop choosing them. And that was louder than any yes. Downstairs, the walls were probably vibrating with confusion. There'd be whispers, blame, meetings about the meeting they weren't invited to. But here, 2 floors above, it was quiet. No gloating, no revenge speech, just the sound of alignment returning, the sound of something real beginning again. The deal closed on a rainy Monday morning. No boardroom, no champagne, no announcement, just a signed document, routed through a proxy firm, tucked into a file marked Structural Equity Adjustment, Silent Partner Acquisition. The building's majority stake now belonged to Everline Holdings, a quiet, conservative entity with no obvious affiliations. On paper, they were just another low-profile capital fund. But behind Everline was Ash and North, and behind Ash and North was me. I bought 62% of the building that Venturon Capital leased its 4 floors from, and no one knew. I didn't want to own it because of ego. I didn't even want the control. Really, I wanted the freedom 6 years ago, before Venturon. I co-founded a boutique advisory firm with 2 colleagues from grad school. We sold it in a quiet acquisition, and I walked away with 15% equity, non-voting and passive, for years. It sat there, growing. I never touched it, never needed to. But this year, their valuation tripled, when the last dividend hit my account. I didn't buy a new car or a bigger apartment. I bought leverage. I bought silence. I bought the ground beneath their empire. I drafted the letter myself, simple, direct, legally airtight. No emotion, just resolution. To Venturon Capital. Office Lease Division, subject, lease termination notification. Effective 60 days from the date of this notice. All leased space currently occupied by your organization within floors 6-9 will be revoked. Per Clause 4A, Performance and Ethics Breach, of the Standard Lease Agreement. This action is non-negotiable. Sincerely, Everline Holdings. Property Oversight Team. I clicked Send at 10:45 a.m. Then I turned off my screen and opened the blinds. The light was soft that day, clouded, cool, perfect for clarity. On the floor below, people were still running meetings, giving presentations, pretending the foundation hadn't just shifted beneath their feet, the same foundation they thought I'd fallen through. By 1:30 p.m., the emails started flying. Michelle forwarded me the first one. Subject: Urgent, immediate building notice. Please advise. Then Diana added a screenshot from one of her contacts in facilities. We're confirming the lease termination came from Everline Holdings, who, somehow, controls the majority stake now. But it was Lewis who dropped the real gem. An internal Venturon thread had leaked. a poorly timed reply all chain that spiraled into chaos. Buried inside was one line that made my pulse skip, not from nerves, but from something colder. Did we just get evicted? By her? I stared at those words for a long time, not with pride, not with smugness, just stillness. Yes, they did. And I didn't raise my voice. I didn't storm into an office or threaten legal action. I simply signed the right document, at the right time, from the right altitude. It didn't take fury to dismantle a legacy built on arrogance. It only took precision. By the time the sun set, Venturin had called an emergency meeting. I could imagine Graham pacing, sweating, trying to understand how someone he demoted had just pulled the floor out from under him. Literally. I didn't need to attend that meeting. I had already left it. 2 floors above, long ago. By 8:50 a.m., I was at my desk, sipping black coffee and listening to the hum of the floor below collapsing in real time. You could hear it, not in decibels, but in tone. The abrupt stops in conversation, the hiss of whispered questions, the muffled curses behind slammed office doors. Graham had tried to downplay the lease termination in a company-wide email, calling it a sudden but manageable transition. But everyone knew better. You can't fake stability when security is changing the locks. At 9:23 a.m., the security guard on lobby duty buzzed our office. There's a man downstairs yelling at the front desk. Name's Graham Lockhart. Says he needs building access reinstated. I kept my voice even. Tell him to contact Everline Holdings. We don't handle tenant grievances. There was a pause on the line. Then a quiet chuckle. Yes, ma'am. I walked over to the window that overlooked the lobby from 2 floors up. Graham was pacing, face flushed, phone pressed to his ear with so much force it looked like he wanted to crush it. His other hand gestured wildly at the front desk, but no one moved. He wasn't in charge here anymore. Michelle walked over and stood beside me. She followed my gaze without asking. Do we say anything? No, I said. We've already said everything we needed to. A moment later, the elevator doors opened at the far end of the lobby. A well-dressed man and woman stepped out, familiar faces from the client's executive team. One of them approached the reception desk, glanced at Graham briefly, then asked calmly, We're here for a 10 o'clock with Nicole Hayes, 10th floor. The receptionist didn't blink. Of course, take elevator C. Graham turned, startled. You mean Venturon Capital? The man shook his head with a faint smile. No, not Venturon. We're meeting Nicole Hayes. Graham's shoulders dropped as the elevator closed behind them. There was no scene, no shouting match, just a quiet acknowledgement that the room he once commanded was no longer his to enter, or even interrupt. I returned to my desk, flipped open a new file, and got back to work. Minutes later, a soft knock tapped against the glass wall of the office. It was Claire, a junior associate from Venturon. She looked nervous, too overdressed for a casual visit, too composed for a meltdown. I hope it's okay, she said. But I was wondering if you're hiring. She handed me a folded resume, already printed, already signed. I glanced down at the header. Claire Matheson, Business Strategy Analyst, current employer. Venturon Capital. My lips curved into something not quite a smile. Not pity, not revenge, just confirmation. Let's talk after lunch, I said. As she turned to leave, I looked around the office, at Michelle deep in her model projections, Lewis mapping rollout deadlines, Diana on a call with legal. No one was celebrating. No one needed to. Because we weren't here to gloat. We were here to replace what failed and bury it quietly. And from the look on Graham's face in the lobby below, he knew it, too. The building was quieter than usual that morning. Not empty, just still. Like something had settled. Something long overdue. I stood by the tall glass window in my corner office, 2 floors above the place that used to define me. Below, the lobby bustled with movement, people coming in, people going out, just not the people who once dismissed me. No tears today, no bitterness, only breath, steady and full. Behind me, the team was already in the conference room. Diana straightened the contract packet on the table. Lewis reviewed the rollout calendar one last time. Michelle adjusted the presentation slide, the Ashen North logo glowing behind her. The client was 5 minutes early. They didn't come with an entourage, or with hesitation. They came with purpose, and pens. We exchanged greetings, settled into our seats, and walked through the final points. I led the conversation, calm, precise, assured, not because I rehearsed it, but because I lived it. By 9:30 a.m., the strategy transfer was complete. By 9:31, the contracts were signed. No applause, just nods, handshakes, and quiet affirmation. The kind of moment that doesn't ask to be celebrated, because it already is. After they left, I walked back to my desk. The light hit the logo on the wall just right. Ash and North Advisory, etched in brushed steel. It felt solid, earned. I turned to the window once more, but this time, I reached for the cord and gently drew the blinds closed. I didn't need to look down anymore. That chapter was over. Back at my screen. A new email sat in my inbox. Subject, "Can we talk?" From Graham Lockhart. I hovered over it for a moment, not out of anger, but out of clarity. Then I clicked archive. No response needed. I rose, walked into the conference room where my team was already laughing about something unrelated, and sat at the head of the table. Diana handed me a pen. "You should keep this one." She smiled. I did. Because this pen, unlike the last, signed something that wouldn't be taken away. We didn't build this company out of revenge. We built it because truth deserves a home. Because silence doesn't mean surrender. It means patience. And when the time is right, it becomes the loudest force in the room. If you've ever been overlooked, replaced, or underestimated, I hope this story reminds you, sometimes the best revenge isn't noise, it's progress. And if you felt something, anything, while listening, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me, have you ever been quietly building something, just waiting for the right moment to show them who you really are? I'd love to hear your story. Because sometimes, silence deserves an audience, too.